The book on Submerged, and she was very kind enough to donate both of these for our giveaways, as well as a gift card to Joseph Beth Bookstore. So thank you very much, Janice. She also would like for you to hold your questions till the end of her presentation. It will be easier to do it that way. And next, Dan Reginald, our managing board member, I'd like for him to come up and we're going to do our giveaway.
Welcome here. Eddie and I are going to give away a couple things tonight. What are we going to do with that?
Well, we've got 2 books, Submerged, A Comforting Light, and a gift card.
So the first one will be for in the studio.
You will let them choose.
Oh yeah, yeah, the studio, since you're here, right? And number 907. Who's got number 907? Right back there.
Which one would you like? A Comforting Light. It has to do with Mary Jo Crawford and the pink ribbon.
All right. And your name is? Ruth Ann. Let's give Ruth Ann a round of applause, everybody. And then we're going to give away a book online. So everybody who's online, if you'll just go to the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. By the way, welcome everybody online. Hope you like the new camera, which I think is working, and hope you enjoy it. We're glad to have you here. If you'd like a chance to win the book from Janice, go down to the bottom of your screen on the Q&A section, put your email address in, and you will be registered to win. That's the same way that you'll ask Janice a question tonight during our presentation. So let's, that won't be a ticket. Okay. So this though, we'll let you know who won the online version towards the end of the program. But what we're going to do, just because we want you to know that Empower You is now a Pepsi only studio, we're going to give away yeah, let's give it up for that. Pepsi, what did they say 40 or 50 years ago? What for those who think young, is that what they said? We're going to give away a 12-pack of Pepsi or Diet Pepsi to number 896. Who is number 896? Let's try one more then. Oh, right there. I'm sorry, Diane. Pepsi or Diet Pepsi? Diet Pepsi. We'll get you at the end, Diane. Thank you. And let's give Betty a round of applause. We're glad to have her here. Oh, we've also got a Joseph Beth card. We're going to give that away for the studio. Go ahead, draw.
Those are all from Janice.
See, you guys, you got to come in. You got to come in to be part of the team. Number 889, Joseph Beth. What could be better than that? Joseph, a gift card for Joseph Beth Books. Number 889. Get your ticket out. Number 889. Let me. Somebody's trying to find their ticket. Okay, we'll pick somebody else. How about number 888? Right there, Mr. Mel DeWitt. Let's give him a round of applause. So we had a little audio problems the other night at our first time here in a year. And unfortunately, we've had a problem having our guest who's at home in her tax studio, getting her to come in live on the screen. So Nancy won't be able to join us tonight. Nancy Brunemann, who's an accountant, who's going to give us a few tips on taxes, but we're going to try to reschedule her soon. So very, very sorry about that. I just had a few things I wanted to share with you that I wasn't able to the other night. Just a couple of light humored things that people had sent me that I thought were fun, that I thought you might enjoy. The first one involves the Babylon Bee. I'm a big movie fan. I thought this was really funny. I don't know if you saw Godzilla versus King Kong when you were young. It was one of the biggest movies ever. The Babylon Bee, Godzilla versus Kong. It's fun, but what does it do for minorities, immigrants, and the LGBTQ community? I just thought it was kind of humorous. And then my friend Dan sent me this. I think it was Dan. Wait, you mean I need to show a photo ID to get a fishing license? Well, yeah, mister, it's not like you're just voting for president or something with his can he's not part of the Pepsi, he's not part of the Pepsi Empower You team. But just a couple of fun things. Oh, it was my friend Dan Clark who sent me this. You know, you can contact these people. That's not a bad thing to do. This is the screen on, if you go to Coke.com, if you're a Coke drinker and you're mad about them taking political stances, you just go to this screen and you're able to enter them a message that can be really, really straight to the point. I encourage you to do that. Boy, Tuesday night, what a fun session. Forbidden Fruit with Peter Braun. Played online Bruce F., who won the book. Peter, I think, left us 9 books and we've sold all of them. And I can't wait to have a chance to read mine. And Peter, I believe, is the publisher of Janice's book, which is great, chilidogpress.com. I wanted to show this slide. I made a comment to Peter near the end of the presentation about how I thought it was such a terrible deal when Peter left the Enquirer. He left, but we got Eugene Robinson, but I couldn't show you. I just thought that was kind of funny. And if you want to rewatch tonight's class, you just wait 24 hours, go to the class on empoweryouohio.org. You look for the link for the recording and you can watch it and share it with your friends. It's really easy to do. That's the team that Betty went over, and we're really appreciative to everything that they do to help empower you. So we've got a required reading tonight. Since you're in the studio, you're going to get an actual printout copy if you want to take one with you. My friend Bill Roll in the back, our treasurer, sent me this yesterday. It's an interesting article. For those of you who are online who want to read it, it's in tonight's class notes, and you can click it and read it. But it's from our friend Maurice Thompson at the 1851 Center for Constitutional Law. Many of you will remember Maurice did a class for us. Hey, Jay, could you turn the music off, please? Thank you. Maurice did a class for us last semester on the pandemic and all the businesses that were hurt by the pandemic. So there was a big ruling yesterday in an Ohio court in Ashland, Ohio. Where's Ashland? Is that, can anybody? It's up north. And the article says an Ohio court late Wednesday cast doubt on the lawfulness of the state's mask mandates, holding that the government and the Department of Health lack authority to issue such mandates. For Empower You sessions, I think we've got 6 or 7 left. I would love for you all to be able to make a decision if you come here, whatever you want to do, whether you want to wear a mask or not wear a mask, but we're not able to do that because that's not the law, but it may not be the law anyway. So this is a good article. Make sure you grab one of these when you leave. We'll hand one out to you. So April 13th, when Empower You started, we used to go all around the city and do events. It just got a little hard with the audio visual, but we're going to, we'll place the 20th Century Theater on Tuesday night. 6-term Congressman Bob McCune will be our guest speaker. He's fantastic. I've heard him speak 2 or 3 times, and he's going to talk about trade policy and the third-party money. And please join Betty and me and the team down there. It'll be a fun night. You can get some adult beverages there. It's a really cool place, and we look forward to seeing you down there. That's Tuesday night. And then on next Thursday night, I'm going to be doing a class on somebody I've been really studying for several weeks now, and that's Winston Churchill. The title of the class is Winston Churchill, the Indispensable Man. And I just kind of wanted to just talk to you about the class for a minute, to try to pique your interest, try to see if I could get you to maybe think about coming. I'm looking for my pointer. And I wanted to talk to you about, I wanted to paint the picture for you about what I'm going to be talking about, because it's kind of amazing. So Churchill became Prime Minister of England on May the 10th, 1940. He had been a liberal, but he actually was a conservative when he became Prime Minister. So this is 1940. This is a really bad time. 18 days after Churchill became Prime Minister, a meeting happened, which was an incredible meeting, but I wanted to set it up for you. I had a nice little pointer, but I can't quite find out what I did with it. But here's how the world looked in 1940. This is hard for me to imagine. Austria had been taken over. Czechoslovakia was no more. Poland had been crushed and divided into two countries. Hitler had taken out Norway. Holland had surrendered. Belgium had been run over. Mussolini down here in Italy had joined ranks with Hitler and entered into a pact with him. Britain, look at this little island over here, totally on its own, almost taking on the entire continent of Europe. All there was Soviet Union. Part of Hitler's group had expanded into there, and even down south, it was totally blue, totally German Reich allies. So what happened, and we'll talk a lot about this at the class, was 18 days after Churchill entered the office, 3 people called on him, and they said, "You're going to meet with us." And Mussolini had called this gentleman right here, a lawyer from France, and said, "You get Churchill to negotiate with us. We want the war to end." And this guy from France, Paul Renaud, came to see Churchill, and he said, France is folding. Germany's on the verge of taking over all of our warships. Our warships are the best in the world, and all those warships are going to Britain to fight you. In walks Earl of Halifax, who is the leader of Churchill's party. He says, "You have to negotiate with Hitler." Neville Chamberlain, the previous prime minister, was the third person in the meeting, said, "It's time to negotiate. It's time to end that." Our class will be talking about the leadership style that Churchill took on and why he was such a unique leader for his time. I hope you can join us next Thursday night. I'm not able, Jay, could you take me back 2 slides? And or we can leave that on and we'll just, I'll announce Janice. Clicker's not working. So we're really glad to have Janice here tonight. She's worked more than 2 decades as an award-winning journalist before becoming an acclaimed author and freelance writer. In 2020, her debut book, Submerged, Ryan Widmer, His Drowned Bride and Justice System, took honors in the true crime category of 2 national contests, the Indie Reader Discovery Awards and the National Indie Excellence Award. The book had earned more than 100 5-star ratings on Amazon.com at the time and is ranked top 30 in its category. Janice has done more than 50 public presentations about the book. Submerged exposes hidden angles of the national publicized bathtub drowning mystery, which Janice covered for the Cincinnati Enquirer through 3 spellbinding trials. Janice completed her second book, a biography of a Cincinnati area philanthropist. She will share information about it tonight. She's a graduate of Kent State University, and in recent years, she has covered high-profile cases for the Associated Press, including the 2019 trial of Warren County teen Brooke Schuyler Richardson. You'll have to come back and tell us about that. That's a great case too. On the side, Janice teaches group fitness classes, so her feet stay as busy as her keyboard does. Welcome, Janice, to Empower You. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for that fantastic introduction, and thank you to everyone who is here tonight in studio or online. I have to say, I'm so thrilled to be here because I've been a big fan of Empower You. I've been watching all of the not all of them, a lot of the online classes, and I personally feel so enriched. So will you please join me in thanking Empower You for all they do? Before I launch into my presentation, I did want to mention that afterward I will be autographing. I know some of you were already kind enough to meet with me and get an autographed copy of 1 or more of my books. And thank you so much for supporting me as an independent author. But I will be, after my presentation, out in the hallway to talk with some of you. And if you would like to purchase a book, that would be great. As was mentioned in the introduction, besides Submerged, the topic of tonight's discussion, I also brought copies of A Comforting Light. It's a biography of breast cancer crusader Mary Jo Cropper. Who has heard of the Cropper Center at Bethesda North? All proceeds from that book do go to the Cropper Center. Interestingly, the family of Mary Jo Cropper read my book, Submerged, and ended up hiring me to write her biography because they liked my murder book so well. So you go figure. But it was actually, I was quite honored, and I almost turned down the job just because I felt like, oh gosh, I don't know anything about cancer, and I'm a crime writer. And God bless my husband, Michael, because he said, you know, you wrote all kinds of stories, including medical stories. You can do this. And it turned out to be one of the most enriching experiences of my life. So I hope to come back for a future presentation about that book. So let's get submerged together. Before we do that, I'd like to help you understand a little bit more about me and why I wrote the book. During my 27-year career as a journalist, I was drawn to crime stories because the stakes just don't get any higher. We're talking life or death, good versus evil, innocence versus guilt, freedom versus incarceration. But covering somewhere around 300 murder cases took its toll on me. Unless you're completely heartless, you can't help but be affected by the loss of human life, reduced to a few sordid lines in a newspaper or online article. But I always believed that what I wrote would help people in some way. Maybe my readers would avoid walking down a dark alley alone. Maybe they would do something nice for the victim's family. Maybe they might come forward with information that would help the police. Or maybe they would just hug their kids a little tighter that day. I did see some very positive effects over the years of some of the stories that I wrote, and that was really gratifying to know that I had done some good. But then along comes the Widmer case, and it rocked my world. Among my 300-ish murder cases, the Widmer case was the one that boggled my mind and hurt my heart the most. It's the one with the most unanswered questions, and it's the one that made me question whether it was a murder at all. It's also the one that seems most relatable on a personal level. Most of the homicides I covered involved people whose deaths were sadly somewhat predictable because they themselves were involved in drug dealing, burglaries, or other crimes, or at least hung around people who did those things. So in a way, it's unfortunately not surprising sometimes when these things happened. But this case was different. It involved a college-educated suburban couple. They just seemed so daggone ordinary, fresh-faced, 20-year-old, some 20-somethings that had their whole lives ahead of them. They had been married only 114 days when, bam, all of a sudden, sweet, bubbly Sarah was dead, drowned in her own bathtub, a place that had been her refuge. And her mild-mannered, henpecked husband, Ryan, was accused of murder. And both of their families were plunged into a hellish alternate reality. Every move came under public scrutiny. News reporters and the criminal justice army, coroners, attorneys, private investigators, police invaded their lives, and none of them would ever be the same again. To some extent, any of us who were living here and paid attention to this case, I don't think will ever be the same either. How many of you were living here during the crazy time when all of this was happening? Raise your hand, please. So pretty much almost all of us, right? I think you might agree that this case did something to our collective psyche as a community. I actually know of women who are afraid to take baths now as a result of this case. I know of men who are afraid to possibly call 911 if something bad were to have happened to their wife for fear that they would be accused. I think all of us can picture ourselves playing some part in the Widmer drama. Maybe you sympathize with Ryan's mom, who drank herself to death after her son was convicted, or with Sarah's mom, who was devastated by the loss of her only daughter, who she called her best friend. Or maybe you feel for Ryan's dad, who depleted his retirement fund to defend Ryan, even though father and son had been estranged for 8 years after a contentious divorce. Gary Widmer sadly learned about his son's arrest by reading my article in the Enquirer. I did not know that until I went to write this book, and I really, really felt terrible for the man to learn that. And that wasn't the only thing that bothered me as I researched this book. As for me, I think about Ryan and Sarah every single day. My husband, Michael, can attest to this. I have visited Sarah's grave, and I have visited Ryan in prison, lamenting that either of them ended up in those places. Places I wish I never had to visit, places where I pray for answers. I've often wondered why this case profoundly touches anyone who really delves into it. And I think it's because of this. The Widmer saga forces us out of our comfort zones. It forces us to confront two frightening possibilities. One, did an ordinary yes dear kind of guy just snap and turn into a vicious hands-on killer, shoving his beautiful bride underwater until she went motionless? Or maybe the justice system got it all wrong, despite 3 trials? Is it possible that Sarah suffered from some undetected medical problem that caused her to drown? A lot of people think so, and that was something that was attempted to be argued during court. If that was the case, there is no crime at all here. And Ryan has spent 10 years in prison for a death he didn't cause. And Sarah's loved ones still don't know why she died. Both of these scenarios are unsettling to consider. A forced drowning or a drowning caused by medical misfortune. Both seem far-fetched, yet these are the only 2 possibilities that I can think of based on all of the evidence. As we consider these 2 possibilities, tonight I would like to challenge you. At the outset of this talk, please try to set aside what you think you know about the case of Ryan and Sarah and about crime and justice. Pretend you're looking at this case for the first time, because that's precisely what we ask jurors to do every single day in this country. Yet, if we're honest with ourselves, that's nearly impossible. Still, it is something to strive toward. And it's what I tried to do as I researched and wrote Submerged. When you open the cover of the book, the very first quote you see is this one. Truth only reveals itself when one gives up all preconceived ideas. Think about that for a moment. In writing this book and giving this presentation, I didn't set out to prove a specific viewpoint. I set out to answer questions, to bring hidden facts to light, and to provide context, leading each of you to reach your own conclusion. Tonight, I hope I can help you to think differently about this case, about the justice system, and also about the ways in which you search for truth in your own life. So buckle up and hang on for the ride as we explore my 3 main topics tonight. First, we're going to talk about the established facts and differing interpretations of them. Second, we will talk about the hidden facts, things that investigators, jurors, and the police did not know, including a possible alternative theory of what happened to Sarah. And finally, we'll talk about lessons that can be learned from this whole situation. And now, as Joe Friday would say, just the facts, ma'am. So here we go. Sarah Widmer, 24 years old, drowned in a Warren County bathtub on August 11, 2008. She was home alone with her 27-year-old husband of just 4 months, Ryan. He called 911 that night, and the very first words out of his mouth were, "My wife fell asleep in the bathtub, and I think she's dead." There was no sign of an intruder, and there was no sign that Sarah had taken drugs that could have caused her to drown. Based solely on these bare bones facts, investigators smelled foul play. Kind of went something like this. 24-year-old women don't just fall asleep in bathtubs and drown. In fact, a lot of people can agree with that. That doesn't sound right. That's ridiculous. You know, of course, the husband, when he says she fell asleep in a bathtub, he's making an excuse to cover up his guilt. Of course, he just killed her. And other facts intensified those suspicions. Ryan told a dispatcher that his wife was face down in the bathtub, but he later told a nurse that she was face up. To first responding police and medics, Sarah's skin felt dry or not overly moist was one description, and only her hair was wet. There was no water on the floor, at least that anyone noticed. Now, later, we did learn that magazine pages were crinkled from wetness, and carpet samples were so wet that the moisture soaked through the paper evidence bags. But at the initial scene, the report was everything was dry. So there were 2 blood stains on the carpet where Sarah had lain. One was near her head, clearly from the bloody, foamy froth that typically does come from drowning victims' mouths. That's because when you breathe in air, it mixes with your blood in your lungs, right? Your bloodstream. But if you're breathing in water, that's also mixing with the bloodstream. So that's why the water and the blood are a horrible mix that just comes out of drowning victims. It's an awful situation. So Ryan stated that he found Sarah at the faucet end of the tub and not at the end where you would be reclining for a nice relaxing bath. So all of this is making the investigators wonder, hey, this is weird. This just doesn't add up. If Ryan had just fished his tub out of a tub full of water, wouldn't her entire body be soaking wet? And wouldn't water have dripped all over the floor? And why would there be 2 blood stains on the carpet? That sure seems to suggest that maybe her body was moved. And what about those conflicting statements? Was she face up? Was she face down? And at the faucet end of the tub? Yet other facts didn't neatly fit into the murderous scenario that police envisioned. There were no obvious injuries on Sarah, none. And Ryan, clad only in boxer briefs, his almost entire body visible, was completely unscathed as well. There was not a scratch on him or on her. So how in the world does a person drown someone and leave no marks? There was no sign of a struggle in the bathroom or anywhere else in the house. No knocked over furniture. Nothing was broken or out of place. There were no wet towels, which would have proven that Ryan cleaned up a watery mess in the aftermath of a struggle. And investigators were unable to pin down a motive. No extramarital affairs, no fat life insurance policy to collect, no financial problems, and no nasty text messages. In fact, I actually got to see the text messages of Ryan and Sarah, and they said things, some of the last text messages they sent to each other were, love you more, love you most. That was kind of their thing. Love you more, love you most, back and forth. So, investigators struggled to find anyone who said Ryan ever got angry. And they finally found one guy. He recalled that Ryan was mad about a baseball game once when he was 10 years old. So they had to really go back far to even find any history of this guy being violent or having a tendency to snap, right? So if Ryan drowned Sarah, how did he manage to do it while leaving not a single scratch on himself or her? And if there had been a straw, wouldn't water have been splashed everywhere? Who is this guy? Some kind of criminal mastermind? Even though not a shred of physical evidence attached Ryan to the drowning scene, and even though evidence of a violent struggle was absent, the investigators were convinced they had this case cracked. Ryan Widmer had drowned his wife. But was it really that simple? I admit, when I first heard about all of this, I thought it sounded weird and suspicious too. But then you have to wonder, did tunnel vision blind the investigators to hidden clues about what really happened in the Widmer bathroom that night? So now we're going to get into some of the hidden facts that surfaced later and how they might have affected the case if they had surfaced sooner. Less than 12 hours after Sarah drowned, the county coroner made a preliminary ruling of homicide. But before doing so, he did not talk to Ryan. If the coroner had spoken to Ryan, Ryan could have shared his concerns about Sarah's history of falling asleep in public settings, at football games, in crowded bars, at family gatherings. And the problem was so frequent that friends actually teased Sarah about it. At a baby shower, all the gals wore name tags with baby-related nicknames. Ladies, you know how that is. We do these corny things like that, baby-related nicknames. And guess what Sarah's read? Sleeper. It was kind of funny then, but not so much later. It became absolutely chilling for people who knew Sarah. Still, if the coroner had known about Sarah's sleepiness, it's unclear what effect it might have had on his ruling. That's because the coroner admitted on the witness stand in trial 3, he did not know what part of the brain should be microscopically examined for narcolepsy, sudden daytime sleepiness, or excessive daytime sleepiness that can lead to bouts of paralysis, which could lead to drowning if that paralysis strikes in a bathtub. Granted, the chances of this might seem small, yet narcolepsy does affect an estimated 1 out of every 2,000 people, and it's often undiagnosed. I can tell you, I have received quite a few emails from people who say they almost drowned to death and they got diagnosed with narcolepsy or another disorder after someone saved their life. In fact, just 2 days ago, I was doing a presentation for a college criminal justice class when one of the participants sent a message talking about his harrowing experiences with a sleep disorder. Here is what he wrote, quote, "I also have sleep paralysis and can personally attest to the entire nightmare that it is, making me feel as if I'm suffocating and can't catch my breath. My mind wakes up before my body. So I'm entirely aware of my surroundings and I'm unable to do anything except a moaning scream for help to wake up." Wow. He pictured this possibly happening to Sarah in the bathtub and said, "It's terrifying to imagine." I agree. So before making his ruling, the coroner also did not obtain Sarah's medical history. Those records, which were obtained later, showed that Sarah did once complain of sleepiness to her doctor about a year before her death, but no tests were ever done to find the cause. No sleep study, no blood tests, no anything. Friends later speculated that Sarah must have minimized the problem, kind of like blew it off when she talked to the doctor and was only doing it to appease Ryan, who was really concerned about this. So Sarah's medical records also showed some other issues that were unknown to the coroner, and we will get into those later. Before labeling Sarah's death a homicide, the coroner also didn't know the extent of life-saving efforts used on Sarah. Sarah had undergone 45 minutes of aggressive CPR and a half dozen failed attempts to insert a breathing tube. The coroner had only attempted that type of procedure called an intubation once, back when he was in medical school about 15 years prior. And the coroner testified he did not know about studies showing that, guess what? Intubation injuries can mimic strangulation injuries. So when the coroner conducted his autopsy, he was unaware of all of that context. And he was relying partly on information from a detective who only had 4 hours of death investigation training. Yeah. So that detective was present for the autopsy, and I'll explain more about this detective later. So now, this is a little graphic, but when the coroner cut into the Sarah's neck and found bleeding and bruising deep inside here, he actually did think this was evidence of blunt force injury or strangulation. And therefore, he believed that Sarah's death was homicide. Interestingly, during the first trial, he said, "I think it's homicide." But later, by trial 3, the statement was a lot stronger, a lot more insistent that it was homicide. The world's foremost death investigator, Dr. Werner Spitz, disagreed. He actually was involved with like the JFK case. I mean, this guy's been around, like the John Benet Ramsey case. He's been involved with, gosh, O.J. Simpson, all the big murder cases. He's the grand poobah, I call him, of death investigation. I mean, this guy has been all around the place. So he actually attributed the injuries to medical procedures, noting that blood could have oozed from an IV needle that was inserted in Sarah's neck. He pointed out that any injury on a drowning victim does look worse, because remember I mentioned about the blood mixing with water? When that happens, the intravenous pressure builds, and also the blood cells get engorged with the water and they explode. The hemoglobin explodes. So any injury is going to look much more exaggerated. And that's why a tiny needle, anybody here give blood or have blood taken? They take it right here. It's called the antecubital fossa. They put it right there. And do you know they used very tiny needles to try to insert an IV in Sarah? It caused a 4-inch area of hemorrhage in her arm. 4 inches long. It was very graphic. And as part of that is because also the decomposition process makes any existing injury look worse. Remember, at the scene, nobody saw any obvious sign of any injury. So did all of these injuries result from medical intervention, or did they just come out later because of the decomposition? It's hard to say, actually. So rather than being a victim of homicide, well, actually, here's what Dr. Spitz said. Based on the available evidence, the manner of Sarah's death was undeterminable by anyone, he said. And rather than being a victim of homicide, maybe Sarah could have suffered a first-time seizure or a sudden heart disruption, either of which could leave no trace and could have been fatal for a person taking a bath. So after the coroner made his ruling, the investigation reached another pivotal point. Police arrested Ryan on a murder charge just 2.5 days after Sarah drowned, without talking to him first, even though he and his attorney say he was willing to talk. That's highly unusual. I have yet to find a police officer who turned down an interview with a willing suspect. It's unclear why investigators never talked to Ryan. If they had talked with him, they could have heard his explanations for nearly all of the circumstances that investigators considered suspicious. Now, what I'm about to share with you doesn't just come from interviews that I had with Ryan. I was actually shocked to find a document among all of his lawyers' materials in the basement of a downtown Cincinnati law office, a note that he had written, and it went on and on and on. No, hardly any punctuation, but it was just like a typewritten note that I started shaking when I realized what it was. And I was able to authenticate through the law firm's secretary that a Post-it note that said Ryan's notes was her handwriting. And so it matched. The only difference was there was more rich detail, and that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, he's lying to me. It just means that, you know, maybe his memory has faded, but there was more rich detail in that. And so here's what I learned when I interviewed Ryan and when I read that note. And this is what he would have said if the police would have talked to him, I'm quite convinced. When Sarah went up to take her bath, she was walking on her tippy toes. Huh? I mean, isn't that an odd behavior? And I was like, really? What is that? And so I contacted other people and they told me, yes, they observed that she did this. And this could have been an indication of a medical disorder. And again, I'll give you more on that later. When he found her unresponsive in the tub, he immediately pulled the drain plug and propped her up so she was seated against the edge of the tub. This is what he said. And so by the time a dispatcher asked whether water was still in the tub, several minutes would have elapsed. And perhaps this could account for why her body seemed dry. If he pulled the drain plug, it's draining, draining, draining. She's drying, drying, drying. So that he didn't fish her out of a full tub, as the investigators thought. So if Sarah was pulled from that drain tub, it was actually stated on the 911 call, but investigators either didn't seem to catch it or maybe they disbelieved him. I don't know. The 2 blood stains on the carpet probably resulted from moving Sarah's body so that it was fully in the master bedroom, not halfway in and halfway out of the bedroom and bathroom where they were connected. That's what Ryan said happened, that when he got her out of the tub, that he wasn't able to get a good grip and she kind of plopped to the floor a little bit there. And that was as far as he got her. He claims that the deputy helped him move her all the way, the rest of the way out into the bedroom. Deputy testified on the witness stand that she was with her feet at the entrance of the bathroom, not halfway in, halfway out. So there's a major dispute over whether Sarah was moved. Ryan says, at least in his statement, but he never testified, so it wasn't a sworn statement. So what's the truth here? I don't know. But it's an interesting conflict. I cannot help but wonder what would have happened if the coroner or the police had interviewed Ryan and learned these things. Do you think that it gives you a little bit of a different idea of what could have happened in that bathroom if you hear his explanation? Or do you think maybe you think it doesn't add up, but I do think it adds an interesting perspective. So would the investigation have taken a different turn, and would tests have been done to rule out other causes if he talked about this sleepiness? But maybe nothing would have mattered because, as one of Widmer's lawyers stated, this case seemed to be a perfect storm of things gone wrong. We don't have time to list everything here, but let's just say, what are the chances of a murder case having a suspect who tended to communicate unclearly, a detective who had little death investigation training, a sleepy victim who was never tested for medical problems, whose body was cremated, largely as a practical cost-saving measure, but it destroyed any chance that Sarah could be further examined. So now we're going to launch into some more analysis and opinion about what I consider to be flaws in the justice system exposed by this case. I think that most people do not understand how the justice system functions and malfunctions. While I think the justice system usually gets it right, when things go sideways, though, there's little hope for setting it straight. Once people make the decision to charge a person, or a coroner makes that homicide ruling, it's almost too late to turn back. The battle is already mostly lost. Prosecutors can outspend, outplay, and outlast just about any defendant. I know that's kind of borrowed from Survivor, but it seemed to work. And in the court of public opinion, an accusation typically comes with an instant verdict, guilty. Think about your own behavior when you're listening to the news on the radio or you're watching TV. You're like, oh, that's the guy who did that. And this is, you say this even before the trial's been held, don't you? I've done it, so I know. But it's also, another thing that happens is that the police and the public take a really dim view of a defendant who doesn't testify and of one who changes his story. Like in the case of Ryan, face up, face down. But if you think about it a little more deeply, is it possible? Is there a non-sinister explanation for that? Could he have just been nervous maybe and upset and then misspoke? I mean, I've caught myself misspeaking when I've been trying to talk about this case and sometimes said face up when I meant to say face down. Also, if people don't testify and take the witness stand, are they doing it to hide something? Maybe, but are they not taking the stand for another reason? Maybe because, as in Ryan's case, he was just not a good communicator. But a lot of people in the public, they don't think about that. They're like, well, he had 3 chances to testify, so who cares? So again, it's just a different perspective. And also, most people trust that all the evidence will come out in court. Yet, consider these instances of information that was kept out of Ryan's trials. In the midst of trial 1, the prosecution changed the bill of particulars, which is a document that says, here is how we think this happened. It originally just said bathtub, but one of their own witnesses testified bathtub, toilet, or sink. They quick hurried up and changed it. And I think I'm the only reporter who noticed that they filed it, an amended version. And guess what? The jury wasn't allowed to know that change was made. I thought it looked really weird, kind of like we're in the middle of a trial and you change this? Do you even really know what happened and you have a man on trial for murder? It really raised a lot of questions with me. Jurors also weren't allowed to hear from a defense witness who would have discussed one of the most baffling aspects of this case. I do not know why the judge ruled that this witness could not testify, but I do think it was a mistake because that expert's testimony might have helped settle a nagging question, whether there was sufficient time for water on Sarah's body to evaporate before the medics touched her. Jurors were unable to contain their curiosity about that. So absent actual evidence, the jurors did their own home experiments to see how long it took a body to air dry after bathing or showering. Some of them actually even laid down on the carpet naked at home. Did anybody here do that? Just checking. Okay. And so what blew my mind was many people see nothing wrong with this. They don't understand that jurors are forbidden from doing any outside investigation, and that is not scientific for you to go home and do that. So after these experiments came to light, the judge threw out the trial 1 guilty verdict citing jury misconduct. Then came trial 2, which ended with a hung jury. Initial reports, by the way, that only 2 jurors wanted to acquit were false. I spoke to 5 jurors who said they wanted to acquit because there were too many holes in the case. I remember one juror summed up the case by saying, it was like the prosecution gave us a bunch of crap evidence and said, here, you figure it out. Oh, really? My goodness. Well, I'd love to talk to you about that. But trial 3 did finally end with a conviction in 2011 after jurors deliberated only 12 hours, 1/3 the length of trial 2 deliberations, which made some observers think that maybe jurors had already made up their minds about Widmer's guilt before the trial even began. This is an accusation that the jurors deny. But I do wonder whether the jurors may have harbored subconscious bias or even Widmer fatigue. You remember this. Everyone was tired of this case, including me. You just wanted it to be over. Most people don't know this, and the jury didn't know this, but trial 3 would not have happened at all if Ryan had accepted a plea deal that would have gotten him out of prison in 5 years. Instead, he rolled the dice and was sentenced to 15 to life. But he was adamant that he was not going to accept that plea deal. He immediately told his lawyers, I am not admitting to something I did not do. And again, this was something that the jurors were not allowed to know. Another thing that the jury didn't know, concerns over the lead detective's honesty were brewing for a long time, but went unexplored until after trial 3 was over. Widmer's lawyers wanted to grill that detective about inaccurate information contained in his employment records, including representations that he got master's degrees from colleges that he never attended. But the detective denied making these misrepresentations, and the Widmer judge ruled that those controversies would not be aired during Widmer's trials. Then, wait till you hear this. Literally, the day after Widmer was convicted, Hamilton Township officials launched an investigation of that detective. Well, what do you think of that? After a 3-month investigation, the detective resigned rather than face a pre-disciplinary hearing. One of the trial 3 jurors told me that it bothered him that this information was concealed from the jury, which makes me wonder whether it could have swayed the verdict. That's one of the points of contention in a federal court case that has been pending since 2014, 7 years. So, as you can see, juries often do not get all of the information that might seem pertinent. And most people want to have confidence that police, prosecutors, coroners, and jurors make good decisions based on solid and complete evidence. While I'm sure that that does happen in some cases, and I've been confident seeing that happen in a lot of cases, I've also seen quite a few cases, including Widmer's, in which investigators make mistakes but might not admit them. And jurors make statements betraying the fact that they base their decisions more on gut feelings or emotion instead of science, logic, and facts. Several Widmer jurors said they didn't like Widmer's demeanor in court. They thought he should have looked more upset when the autopsy photos were shown, for example. But how does demeanor prove guilt? Especially considering that I remember during trial 1, Ryan was so upset when those photos were shown, he turned his head away. And some people criticized him for that too. They said, oh, he can't even stomach to see what he's done to his wife. Of course he's guilty. Either way, he's viewed in a lens tinted guilty. In interviews with me and other media outlets, some jurors repeatedly made statements suggesting they didn't understand and didn't embrace basic legal concepts, which are explained to them in excruciating detail during any jury selection and during the jury instructions. In a criminal case, the accused person is presumed innocent. The defendant does not have to prove anything. His lawyer doesn't even have to put on a single witness. Did you know that? The burden of proof rests with the prosecution. And that proof must be beyond a reasonable doubt, which means there is very little doubt that a crime occurred and that this person committed it. The defendant's decision not to testify cannot be held against him, nor can it be considered for any purpose. That's verbatim from the jury instructions. Sadly, because he didn't testify, Ryan's account of events, including Sarah walking on her tiptoes and his actions about pulling the drain plug, never were presented in court. I think most people in our society perceive that anyone who wins an acquittal or an appeal has won on a technicality and has gotten away with whatever crime. But that's actually rarely true. Acquittals and reversals of convictions are exceedingly difficult to obtain. Prosecutors routinely boast of conviction rates exceeding 90%, and only about 9% of convictions are overturned in federal court. Appellate court laws and rules are designed to preserve the verdict. So that means the scales are already tipped toward that. It's extremely difficult to introduce newly discovered evidence, and the process typically takes a very, very long time. There are 2,765 people on the National Registry of Exonerations. They served an average of 9 years in prison before their names were cleared. And 175 of those people spent more than 25 years in prison. One man was wrongfully locked up for 45 years. Can you imagine? Although Ryan has been imprisoned for a decade as of February, and for more than half that time, he has been waiting for a federal judge to rule on claims that he was wrongfully convicted because of a flawed trial and insufficient evidence. A major point of contention, his lawyer wants to release Sarah's DNA so it can be tested for disorders that may have played a role in her drowning. If they truly care about justice and not just a conviction, why wouldn't they want to know? I don't understand this. Do you? Especially since Ryan's family has agreed to pay for the tests. Another point about the sufficiency of the evidence, I have never heard anyone describe a murder scenario that makes sense and fits all of the known evidence, plus the pattern of injury and non-injury in this case. Interestingly, not even jurors who convicted Widmer could say what happened. One juror I talked to said, quote, "I wasn't there. I'm not God, so I don't know what happened." And actually, when I asked Ryan what happened to Sarah, those were almost his exact same words. "I'm not God. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened." So Jay, if you would be so kind as to put up this for the people online so they can see it, and I'll go through it with our live audience here as well. So remember I mentioned earlier that the coroner did not know some interesting information about Sarah's medical history? Well, here it is. She was born with a cleft palate, and doctors prepared to repair that harmless deformity. They discovered she had a heart murmur, a fact that was omitted from Widmer's first 2 trials, while witnesses continually asserted that Sarah had no heart problems. While it's possible that the heart murmur may have resolved on its own, we do not know that for sure, because a recommended follow-up exam did not happen, and no other EKG or heart rhythm test was done on Sarah until the night she drowned when medics were struggling to revive her. I'm certainly not a doctor, and I can't pretend to diagnose what may have ailed Sarah. But I have put together this chart listing concerns about Sarah Widmer. And I do think that maybe these are pieces of a puzzle that still hasn't fully formed. Although Sarah had some symptoms that suggested narcolepsy, she also seemed to have more factors in common with long QT syndrome. There are a bunch of types of this, a bunch of variants. Oh my gosh, there's that word variant. I probably shouldn't mention it in this day and age with the coronavirus going on. But there are like 15 different ones, I believe. And long QT syndrome type 7, which is also known as Anderson-Tawil syndrome, is known to afflict people with, get this, certain bony abnormalities such as cleft palate and low set ears. Notice this picture, Sarah's ear is not at the normal level. If you draw a line across your eye, the normal alignment, you should be able to cut off the top of your ear if you draw a straight line. Hers is way low, way low. And notice most people you turn sideways, you can see their chin and their jawline. Do you see much of a jawline on Sarah? That is actually another sign that is sometimes associated with this long QT syndrome, which is actually a heart rhythm problem, but these are other manifestations of it. And then it's associated also with paralysis, most often in the legs. Think about that toe walking. Is it possible that Sarah, as paralysis was setting in as she walked on her tippy toes to go take her bath the night that she drowned? Might she have simply collapsed right when she stepped in, explaining why she was at the faucet end of the tub? Sadly, we may never know. This complete list of signs and symptoms was never explored during Ryan's trials. And that, my friends, is a disservice to Ryan, to Sarah, and to the cause of truth and justice. So, now that we've explored all this, where does this leave us? Just as people doing dangerous stunts need safety nets, so does our justice system. The ones in place now are full of holes, but they could be patched up. so that we, the citizens, can have more confidence that the right decisions are reached, and that when there are miscarriages of justice, they can be corrected more expeditiously, not 25 years later. You might think that there isn't anything any of us can do about this, but we can contact our state legislature. The Ohio Supreme Court actually right now has a task force on reforming the criminal justice system, and we can advocate for two changes that I would recommend. Number one, wouldn't it be great if we had like a jury referee? There's actually some states where they have a jury referee that is versed in the law and prevents jurors from doing things like, laying on the carpet naked to test how long a body takes to air dry. If we had had that in trial one, we might not have ever had Widmer 2 and Widmer 3. It would have been solved right there, perhaps. And I think a second possible reform would be to require each county to have what's called an conviction integrity unit. How many has ever heard of that? It's new to all of you. I actually did not know about it until just a few years ago, but it's been a movement that's been going on for about 10 years. And the idea is that if someone is persistently saying, I'm innocent, a lot of people who are actually guilty just eventually kind of shut up and serve their time. But Ryan has never, he still to this day says he's innocent. That this would be an agency that looks into persistent claims of innocence that have things that can be looked at. In addition, Ryan's supporters have started a petition at freeryanwidmer.org to release Sarah's DNA. So if you feel inclined to do that, you can join there. And there is a small but powerful thing that I think each of us can do also. Regardless of whether you ever serve on a jury on a case as big as Widmer's, this case challenges us to consider how we base important decisions upon emotions and first impressions rather than logic and actual evidence. We all have in us something called confirmation bias, which basically means we are biased toward confirming what we think we already know. We want to be right. So you hear about that horrible crime and that's the dude who did it, and you just want to keep on with you dig your heels in. You want to stick with that original opinion. I actually read an article in Psychology Today about confirmation bias from 2015. I'd like to share a quote that really stayed with me. Set your hypothesis and look for instances to prove that you are wrong. So you're flipping it on its head. This is perhaps a true definition of self-confidence, the ability to look at the world without the need to look for instances that please your ego. In conclusion, I cannot say with certainty whether Ryan Widmer is innocent or guilty. I cannot say with certainty whether Sarah suffered from a hidden medical problem as outlined here and that caused her to drown. But I can say this: the unanswered questions and the continued resistance to seeking those answers is quite disturbing. And what happened to Ryan, to Sarah, and to their families could happen to any of us. And that is perhaps the most chilling thing of all. Thank you for your attention and for supporting my work as an independent author. I would love to hear any questions, comments, observations that you would like to have. Do you have one for me now? Dan?
Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask right here?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Rosina Janice, and I like to ask if anybody's ever tried to move dead weight. When somebody faints, they may be just little tiny skinny person, but you try to move a very unwieldy, limp body, it is not easy. You can be a He-Man and try to move a child 3 years old that just passes out. If they've ever tried that and you're the same, maybe 50 pounds heavier than the person that you're trying to drag, it's nearly impossible.
I'm sorry to hear you had that experience, but that's a really great point. Thank you for sharing.
Who else has questions? Right over here.
Yes, ma'am.
We're going to wait. Please
Okay.
wait till the
Wait
microphone
till the
gets to you.
microphone arrives. Yes. Thank you.
My name's Meg, and you brought up an issue in the book about, and I have a concern about it too. Kind of, it speaks to like the quality of our jurors. A lot of people will get a jury summons, and they'll be able to find a reason not to get on the jury. You know, a doctor excuse or a work excuse or whatever. And I'd love to be on a jury. I've only been called once, and I wasn't picked. And you know, I just wonder, is there anything that's being done to try to get people to be on juries, or, you know, we just need to have a better quality of juror.
I think that's a really, really good point too. And I do see, as a person who has attended many jury selections, I've heard the many, many excuses that people make for not wanting to be, and some of them are quite legitimate. Like if you're, you run your own business, you're a family sole provider, or you're a caretaker for an, elderly relative, or you have a sick child. I mean, all of that is legitimate. I really don't know what the answer is to your question, but I agree with you that it is rather disturbing that a lot of the people who serve on juries, I was astounded at some of the comments that they made. And I tried not to share or betray my emotions when people would say things like, oh, well, they didn't prove he was innocent. The defense didn't prove he was innocent. That's not how this is supposed to work. I actually even have heard that it goes the other way sometimes. A friend of mine was on a jury, and we were talking about this phenomenon, and she was telling me that one lady goes, I really do believe that he did it, but he looks too much like my grandson. I can't convict him. So, I mean, this was a totally different case, not Widmer, and it was astounding that someone could actually say that and allow that emotional connection to override the logic that you're supposed to employ.
Janice, so could you
Yes.
kind of set the framework for when you covered the first trial? Did you have to just stop everything? Did you just work just on that? And how long did that take?
Oh, gosh. The first trial, I think, was maybe a week or a week and a half, something like that. Each succeeding trial got longer and longer. My recollection of it is more that in terms of number of transcript pages that I had to read. So it was 1,000 pages for the first trial, 2,000 for the second, and 3,000 for the third. And I reread all of it. And oh, by the way, the quality of the transcripts you would not believe. That's another.
So how many months, like before and after, did it consume of your life?
Well, I did during one of the Widmer cases. I was actually covering another crazy case. It wasn't a murder case. It was a case of child sexual abuse over in Butler County, where there were these twin doctors that were charged with sexual abuse of their pediatric patients over a number of years. And I remember there were times when I was running from one courthouse to the next with my laptop open next to me in the car. So, but I really don't have an exact recollection other than it absolutely did consume me. And even when I had time to rest, I really couldn't sleep. It was so hard to turn my brain off because I went back and forth personally, but in a way that kind of, after I sat back and thought about it, isn't that reasonable doubt that I personally went back and forth.
Could you talk to us about the bathtub?
What about the bathtub?
Well, just, it seems to be all consuming to people, meaning the bathtub was super small and people were trying to get their hands around whether somebody could have really fallen asleep in a small bathtub like that. Did you saw it? What was it? What did it look like?
Well, it was what they call a garden tub. It was like an oval. And I didn't really explain this because, there are so many different areas I could have gone off into. But the bathtub was actually, according to Ryan's lawyer, seized illegally. And I bring this out in the book. They chose not to fight the admission of the bathtub because they didn't want the headline in the newspaper to read, "Defense suppresses evidence in bathtub case." So they made a tactical decision, which I personally believe was a tactical blunder, because that bathtub enabled jurors to do what I call in the book the mental movie, picturing the pushing down in the water. And there are these hand streaks that maybe it was Sarah's. They couldn't tell who made them, when they were made, but they said maybe a smaller pair of hands. So the jurors are picturing the mental movie of her being pushed down in the water, even though I agree. And like I said, that they just were staring at that. They didn't keep it there through like the whole trial. So I mean, but think about any ladies who take baths or gentlemen even who take baths, your knees bend, right? So to me, he did say her knees were kind of like bent, and that he said she would typically kind of sit Indian style and go back and like wash her hair even in the tub. I think a lot of ladies has probably done that. But I don't know how else to describe it other than it wasn't super small, but Sarah was only 4'11" or 5 feet. I forget which right now, but she was not over 5 feet tall.
And what about the concept of when he said on the 911 call that she was face first in the bathtub? Would that have been possible?
Well, I've thought about that a lot too. And when I first interviewed Ryan, I noticed, now I do think his communication has improved over the years. When I first interviewed him, it was kind of like he had words out of order when I would speak to him. And it kind of dawned on me, I wondered if he meant that her face was down under the water, not flipped facing the tub. And I bring that up in the book. Is that possible?
Interesting.
He said, I didn't think about what I was going to say. It just came out.
Who else has questions? Right over here. If you'd wait for the microphone, please.
Susan, and I was wondering, do her parents think that he is guilty or innocent?
Well, Sarah's, great question. Sarah's father is deceased and was at the time of this incident. He died of cancer, unfortunately. Sarah's mother initially and brother initially supported Ryan and even argued for a reduction in his bond. It was very emotional. They said, in our heart of hearts, we don't believe he did this. But then they kind of just drifted away from him, and they never told him why, or his attorneys. So we don't really know why, but I would tend to think that part of the reason could be that the other alternative besides Ryan committing murder would be, oh, well, we don't know what happened. We have a big fat question mark, and that's kind of hard to accept. Yes.
Hi, my name's Jane.
Hi, Jane.
And you mentioned that you have seen Ryan.
Yes.
Has he lost hope, or is he still hoping to go again, or?
Ryan actually does try to hang on to hope. I recently did a story, you could Google it, like medium.com, and I interviewed him for a 10-year anniversary story about his being locked up for 10 years and what that's been like. And interestingly, Ryan has been a foster parent to 50 dogs since he's been in prison. So he's trying to make the most of the bad situation from what I hear.
We have a couple questions online.
Yes.
We have a couple of folks online. One question was wondering if she could have been like kneeling in the tub to wash her hair under the faucet. And the second question was, are you aware of any relationship problems between her and Ryan?
Okay, so about kneeling under the faucet to do your hair, I mean, I don't know whether that could have happened. It actually could have, but we don't know. There wasn't a video camera in the bathroom, and Ryan's not God, and neither were the jurors. They weren't there. So, and the other question was about
wondering if you're
relationship
any
problems.
relationship
Actually,
problems,
no.
yeah.
There were. Here's the interesting thing. Sarah's mom during the first trial, she mentioned a couple little, like they argued about paint color or something like that once. One time he gave her some feedback about, I guess it popped up on his phone that she'd bought a certain amount of things at Target or something. But there was nothing that people went, ooh, this is a serious problem. But by the third trial, her testimony changed completely. To quote a juror from trial 2 who attended trial 3, she seemed like a different witness, because by then she was going, they were hateful to each other. She said nasty things to each other that I can't repeat in court.
Well, just a couple of questions. Sorry, I've got to ask you. First of all, who wanted to have Sarah cremated? Was it Ryan's decision to have Sarah cremated, or was it Sarah's family that?
Here is how that played out. So because they had only been married for 114 days, it wasn't like they sat around and planned their burials, right? So there was no plan in place. There was no life insurance in place. Sarah's family was kind of distraught, and they're like, well, you're her husband, you decide. And Ryan this is what he told me. He said, I was just trying to think, what would I want for myself? And I probably would want to be cremated because I'm a no fuss kind of guy. And plus it was less expensive. So that's why he chose that option. And I was actually kind of surprised that they even allowed that. But that's in fact what happened. But there still is biological material of Sarah available. There are orders to keep all of that preserved for like 30 years or until his incarceration's over. He is up for parole in 2025. And if he still says he's innocent, that can be viewed as lack of remorse, and back he goes, possibly. That's how the parole board perceives a claim of innocence, from what I'm told.
Now, this whole introduction of porn, him watching porn in the third trial, did you consider that to be kind of a game changer in the jury, or was that involved with the family turning against him?
Actually, another reason I didn't bring that up, because I was trying to be Joe Friday, is because the porn watching was actually never introduced during any of the trials, never.
Really?
But we all knew about it, because the way that played out after trial one, and a lot of people were kind of like, we don't think this is right. There were polls done by the Cincinnati Enquirer that said a large percentage of people disagreed with the verdict based on what we as the citizens knew about it. And so when that happened, the prosecutor went public with information that was not allowed to be in the trial. And maybe I would have mentioned that, but again, there's so much I could mention. But what the analysis showed of that computer was that any images that were looked at were deleted immediately after being viewed. And so the chances of Sarah seeing it and them having an argument were believed to be very low, according even to like the expert who did that analysis for the government, for the prosecution. So that's why it wasn't allowed.
Who else has questions for our guest over here?
He wants you to wait for the mic. You guys are good at that. Better than I am.
I'm Diane Landy,
Hi.
and I've not served on a jury, but just what little I know about this situation, it seemed to me if he were guilty, he would have taken the plea deal because he would have had a sure thing versus risking the unknown. Am I wrong in that?
Well, that was definitely something that entered my mind as well. And in the book, I try to say, different ways of weighing information. And that is definitely one way to interpret that. Yes. Actually, while we're on the subject of jurors, I thought you might find it interesting. Guess who got called for jury duty in the same courtroom as the Ryan Widmer case? Guess who was kicked off the jury? Because I knew everybody. I had to go, hi, judge, hi, prosecutor.
Jay, do we have any other questions online?
One more question online. Having been through all of the interviews and studying the case, all that you've done, do you have a personal summation of what you think might have happened?
Well, it was what I ended my presentation with, which is I don't know 100% sure whether he did or did not do this. But I do feel like I have reasonable doubt. If I had to vote, I could not have voted guilty based on what I know. But the problem is I knew more than what the jury knew. So I have a hard time really answering that question. And also, I really tried to approach this very journalistically. Unlike many journalists today, I tried not to take a position. I wanted people to decide for themselves what they thought of it. That's why I explained, hey, the dryness of the body. Some people thought that was suspicious. Other people thought, well, wouldn't water be splashed everywhere if there was a struggle? So there's two ways of looking at so many pieces of evidence in the Widmer case, whether it's the dryness of the body in the bathroom, whether it's the injuries, were they from medical intervention or from Ryan? Very up to interpretation.
Did the fact that he met a couple women while he was in prison and had a baby, Did that get in the third trial at all? Did that at all interfere with anything?
The news about, oh gosh, when I asked Ryan about this in prison for the first time, I said, dude, what were you thinking?
Good question.
And what was interesting is I remember like on 700 WLW, some of the talk shows were characterizing him as being as Casanova. And when I met Ryan, he's kind of like this aw shucks kind of guy. Like he's not suave. He probably get mad knowing that he's not suave, but he's not a ladies' man, in my opinion. He doesn't come across that way. He doesn't have swagger. And so that part about him, he met this woman because she saw his show on Dateline, the Dateline. How many people there have seen the Dateline show that are in this room tonight? They actually did a pretty good job on it, in my opinion. In fact, I've been in contact with Dennis Murphy still from Dateline occasionally, just to, go over some things. So I do think that in the back of their minds, the porn thing that you brought up, like who here was surprised that that was not entered in evidence? The porn thing. I do think that jurors, like I said, it's nearly impossible for jurors to just erase your mind. The tabula rasa, they say, tabula rasa, erased your mind, and just go, because you don't remember where you heard something sometimes. You just know it, right? And once it's out, it's like toothpaste that's been squeezed out of the tube. You can't put it back. So I do think that maybe it's possible that some of the jurors had heard some of these things that called into question his character or whatever. But you have to remember, he did meet this woman a full year after his wife drowned. And she comes up, she's kind of, hotsy-totsy, pretty blonde, and he just goes, well, one thing led to another. He was kind of shy about it when I asked him. He
Were
turned
any of
bright red.
the jurors, any of the three juries sequestered?
No, no.
So they could have found out some of this stuff in the third trial?
That is true. They are ordered to not do any research on their own, but no, they were not sequestered.
Yeah. Any last question? We got one last question.
Hi, Janice.
Right here.
Hi, I'm Janice.
Hi, Janice.
I know you've spoken a lot with Ryan, and I was just wondering if he had any regrets for not testifying, and if he had the chance again, if he would think about testifying.
That's a great question. His statement to me was, I never fully understood why I wouldn't be a good witness. But then he also says, I can kind of see the point where there's nothing to really gain, because if you believe him, he wasn't in the bathroom. So what is he going to say other than, I do think it would have helped him if he was able to describe the water draining and things. However, once again, the judgment of the jurors based on demeanor is huge. And I've actually heard jurors say things like, if somebody is crying their eyes out on the witness stand, they're going, oh, look at those crocodile tears. That's fake. Or if they sound really polished, oh, so rehearsed, guilty. Or if they're nervous, guilty. So either way, it's like people tend to discount what a defendant is going to say, because automatically you think this person's trying to save his own hide. So I don't know that it would have helped. And he has a hard time deciding whether he regrets that or not. He was listening to the advice of his lawyers. And I can tell you that in my speaking with him, I can totally see where, for example, he said to me once, we were talking about one of my very first interviews with Ryan. He said, you can't jump to a gun like they did with me. Like I said, his words would get mixed up. I knew what he meant, but it came out wrong. And then if a person like that goes on the witness stand, then the jury's going to go, that doesn't sound right. He's guilty. Right? So, but good question. I've often wondered about that as well myself. So anybody else?
Let's thank our great guest. What an interesting topic. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for joining us tonight. I guess we have to do this.
Thanks.
Congratulations, everyone. Most of us passed the mask mandate again tonight. That's a great thing. Couple things I want to leave you with. First of all, sorry we couldn't patch Nancy Brunemann from Platinum Accounting in tonight. If any of you need any last minute accounting help, Nancy is on the west side. She's a great accountant. She can be glad to help you. I'll put her name up on the website tomorrow. Janice will be out in the lobby signing books. Please get your copy of Submerged and pick up some interesting pieces. I can't wait to read it, to tie it all together. It'll be so much fun. Tuesday night at 20th Century Theater in Oakley for Bob McCune. Next Thursday night here, we will be talking about Winston Churchill. Thanks for coming. Oh, and for all those of you online tonight, there's a bunch of you. Send us a little email. Let us know if the camera was a little bit better for your virtual experience. We'd love to hear from you at info@empoweruohio.org. Have a great night, everyone. Empower you. Thank you.